issue is that they're being housed and they're not contributing anything to the society. I don't feel that the solution is necessarily having to close hotels down or remove certain people. It's not allowing them in the first place. So that is what we as the public are wanting to see. And if that does not happen, it's going to cause an internal civil war.
Right. Well, you voted for reform, I understand, in these local elections. Was this the main issue that drove you to do that?
The look on the host's face when the voter said there's going to be an internal civil war if the government doesn't get a grip on illegal immigration. They brought her on to explain why she voted for reform. Seems some of the Liberal media are so terrified of reform's rise that they are now starting to ask the right questions. The Labour MP comes across as so disingenuous. He is nodding along in agreement as the voter voices her concerns and says he too is furious about illegal immigration in his constituency. Is he furious? Or is he just telling her what she wants to hear, but off screen he'll be calling this woman a racist? He then reels off all the usual tough talk about illegal immigration that people are sick of hearing. The entire panel is then discussing how much it costs to house illegal immigrants and whether they should be allowed to work or not. The voter then responds with, none of this would be an issue if they weren't allowed into the country in the first place. And she's right, they should not be here. We don't know who they are, and we can't just allow them to work until they've had all the necessary background checks. I can't go get a job without a background check, so why should they? As she said, she's been lied to because she was told they were all refugees fleeing war and death. But in reality, everyone in the migrant hotel near her is a young man who came from France. A Conservative MP asked the Labour MP why they refuse to have a deterrent and why they refuse to even question the ECHR, which actively blocks the deportation of foreign criminals. Of course, we had to have an extreme Liberal on the panel who talks about how humans have always migrated and that they have a fundamental human right to move for a better life. The fact is, Labour still doesn't get it. They don't want to address the issue of illegal immigration, but they are also terrified of losing voters if they aren't seen to be addressing it. Take a walk.
It said they'd close asylum hotels. They've increased the number. And
closed 23 since the election.
Let's be honest and not disingenuous about this. Why does your government never even look at the prospect of derogation from the European Convention on Human Rights, which would stop lawfare, preventing the removal of foreign prisoners and asylum seekers whose claims have failed?
Right.
You won't even look at that.
I don't. Shannon Freeman, who lives near an asylum hotel in Chesterfield. Hello to you, Shannon. What are your concerns?
My main concerns are to do with homelessness. I feel that there's a big issue with it at the moment, and although the Chesterfield Council are trying, there is a massive backlog of local residents that do not have a home to live in. So when the likes of those at the Sandpiper Hotel are housed and fed and clothed and with no expectations of working or giving back to the society, it enrages local residents like myself.
I mean, the bottom line, Shannon, is that I talk about this a lot with my constituents in Makerfield, which is in Wigan, where there were two asylum hotels and there were also houses of multiple occupancy paid for by the Home Office. It enrages me too. When I see a constituent who is homeless and down the road I see a new Serco HMO that's opened up, paid for by the Home Office, that's wrong. And there's no two ways about it. It is outrageous that a system has been allowed to develop in this country that effectively says to local people all over the United Kingdom, just like you, Shannon, we are the Home Office going to come in, we're going to take a hotel away, we're going to fill it because we failed to run our system. And in the meantime, local residents are going to be homeless. That's wrong.
The Dublin Agreement says that you claim asylum in the next safest country. If you're travelling from, say, Syria or Somalia, you're travelling through Greece, Italy, France, Germany. Other countries have dealt with this in a much more robust way.
The The issue is that they're being housed and they're not contributing anything to the society. People are fleeing war-torn countries, women, children, families, and yet, such as the Sandpiper Hotel, the reason that's made news is that's I think it was a 46-room hotel, but it's full of men. So we've been lied to there. We don't know why they're there. They've been there for 2 years at least now. They don't seem to be leaving, and yet homelessness is on the rise. The solution is necessarily having to close hotels down or remove certain people. It's not allowing them in the first place. That is what we as the public are wanting to see, more action on that. And the reason we're not feeling heard is because of places like the Sandpiper, where they just enter our country for no apparent reason. And if that does not happen, it's going to cause an internal civil war.
Right. Well, you voted for reform, I understand, in these local elections. Was this the main issue that drove you to do that? All right, let me bring in Danny. Just a couple of things. Listening to everything that Shannon has said, and she has outlined very clearly, you know, people in migrant hotels for 2 years, the majority, if not all, are men. It doesn't look as if they are people fleeing persecution, although men can also flee persecution, of course. But can you see why, when we go back to our earlier conversation that you were talking about, people are angry and feel they're not being heard and nothing is being done?
Absolutely. I think Shannon and we all, the British electorate, have been let down by successive governments. And Shannon, it's interesting that you talk about the right to work, because you know, there was a time, for decades, asylum seekers who came here and were waiting for their claim to be processed were allowed to work, were filling shortage skills, were paying taxes. But about 20 years ago, under the last Labour government, the government stopped that right to work on the basis that apparently it was going to reduce the sort of pull to Britain. And it's done no such thing. You know, people still want to come here, but it's the worst of all worlds possible, because those people who are sitting there languishing in these hotels want nothing more than to work, to keep, you know, to have the sort of independence and freedom to do the things that they are qualified to do, that they're interested in doing. And meanwhile, because of the system that is, you know, we have one of the slowest and most expensive asylum processing systems in the world. And that's why it takes so long. And meanwhile, we then pay hotels to provide the temporary accommodation. And so I certainly hear that the anger.
What would you do? I mean, if you were
the asylum processing system, which will need public investment, which will need public employees. This will need people to process those claims effectively, to digitise some of that system so the government can be more efficient. Because, you know, let's not forget, the right to claim asylum is a fundamental human right for those people who are fleeing persecution.
Yes, but is that an admission that governments, successive governments, are unable to stop people coming here in the first place?
Well, absolutely, because migration is a fact of human reality. As a species, we've done it for all the time we've been on this planet. And given how globally interconnected the world is, we're not going to stop all migration. We're not going to stop all irregular migration. But what we do need is an effective system that's cost effective to be able to judge when people have a legitimate claim to seek asylum here. So we need a fit-for-purpose system. We then need, of course, migration management that allows us to know more about who comes and goes,